The Department of Justice just suffered a humiliating loss in federal court in its effort to try to detain permanently the leaders of the protest at the church in St. Paul, Minnesota. As you will recall, the Department of Justice arrested Nakima Levy Armstrong, Chantel Louise Allen, and some others, and they tried to arrest Don Lemon. Although the magistrate judge, and we'll talk about this in a moment, did not sign off on the criminal complaint against Don Lemon, but a criminal complaint was signed off against Nakima Armstrong as well as Chantel Allen. And the DOJ was not happy enough just to get the criminal complaint. They argued that these individuals are terrorists. And as terrorists, they need to go into solitary. They need to go and rot in jail and never be released. And that they need to be treated like they're Al-Qaeda or that they're ISIS or that they're the Taliban. That's what the DOJ argued. Now, a magistrate judge said, no, I'm not doing that. We will release them. They're not a flight risk. This is not a crime against a minor. These are people who showed up in a church, and there was a protest at a church. That's what the allegations are. The DOJ alleges this is violations of the FACE Act, which says you can't use physical force or physical coercion or physical intimidation at places of worship that block people's ability to worship. It's got to be physical, and it's got to be physical threats or physical actual conduct. And that law was really intended to stop the physical attacks and assault on women seeking reproductive rights at abortion clinics. In order to make it bipartisan, there was this provision slipped in about churches. And so that's what's being argued here, that you prevented the people on Sunday from praying with physical force and physical intimidation. Now the DOJ says these people need to go into jail forever and they shouldn't be released. They shouldn't get bail. And here's what we've found out thus far. A judge okayed the release of two of the Minnesota church protesters charged with civil rights violations, Nakima Armstrong and Chantel Allen. That's federal judge Laura Provenzino, finds no serious flight risks and sets release conditions. Then a magistrate judge, another different magistrate judge, not a federal judge, magistrate judge Shannon Elkins, ordered the release of a third person arrested in connection with the church protests that took place on Sunday. And the DOJ was calling these people domestic terrorists. If you go into the federal judge Provenzino's order, she's appointed by former President Biden. She says the charged conspiracy is not a crime of violence, does not involve a minor victim. And the court finds more persuasive defendants' arguments that the element to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate a person in the exercise of federal rights does not require physical force, as is required to qualify an offense as a crime of violence. I think that's important finding by the judge as well, though, because the FACE Act requires physical force or physical threats. The federal judge goes on to say the United States is not entitled to a bond hearing under 18 U.S.C. section 3142 sub F sub 1. Consequently, the United States' first basis for revocation of bail is unavailing. The court turns to the United States' second argument, and the court goes on to say that in conducting a de novo review, it is the court's position that on this record, the United States has not met its burden to demonstrate a serious flight risk for these individuals. There's no evidence that, for example, the defendants own homes abroad or even outside Minnesota, or that they have family abroad. To the contrary, defendants have strong ties to Minnesota. The United States risk of flight evidence is speculative. Indeed, Magistrate Judge Miko has imposed them, including that the defendants' travel be restricted to Minnesota unless approved by a supervising officer. And so on those analyses, the court says we're going to allow the magistrate judge's order releasing these individuals to stand, and the federal court will not hold its own separate revocation hearing to revoke their bail and put them back into prison. Let's call in Harry Littman from the Talking Feds podcast, Talking Fed's YouTube channel, Talking Fed Substack. Harry was the lead United States attorney from the Western District of Pennsylvania. He was also top federal prosecutor at Main Justice in Washington, D.C. Harry. So the DOJ right here, is, yet again, I think overreaching, is it putting lightly, with what the statute and the FACE Act is saying. And then they overreach on the overreach, which is even after doing this charge, which I believe is still protected speech. We may have debates about whether the protest should have taken place in the first place inside a church. Protests are intended to make people uncomfortable. That's the very point of protest. I remember when I represented Colin Kaepernick, people were like, I don't like him protesting at football games. Well, that's the point of the protest. He doesn't like that you kept on disproportionately killing black and brown people with excessive force. So yes, the point is to feel a little uncomfortable in a protest. But Harry, they also try to go after Don Lemon. We could talk about all of this, but here the federal judge is saying, what are you doing, DOJ? And I think it's a bigger point because the statute requires physical force. So if already the judge is skeptical that physical force and physical violence was used, the whole FACE Act doesn't say you can't be loud or doesn't say you can't protest. It says you can't use physical force and intimidation. So I think that's an important point as well.
It is a bigger point, Ben, of what's going on here. Look, this is like a Rorschach test. We don't, Don Lemon was there for 7 hours filming. As he says, I was just a journalist here. And that's clear that he was, which is, I think, the main reason the magistrate said, I'm not doing an arrest on these charges of intimidation or whatever they're trying to concoct. But, look, Minnesota, when St. Paul police were called, and at that very point, the protesters left and continued on their way, they were looking at charges of disorderly conduct. It's a case that either is a sort of nothing. It seems to have been a fairly short-lived protest. There were clearly a lot of people in church who were very supportive. In a sense, the pastor they targeted that church because the main pastor, who was not at the pulpit that day, is an ICE official. And, that's the reason they wanted to come in. And the pastor, in the pulpit that day said, shame, shame. So there were some parishioners who said, you're interrupting things here. But as you say, that happens in every demonstration. So anyway, this could be really just run-of-the-mill First Amendment expressive conduct. It seems to have not lasted very long, but there were 40 people there. They did interrupt the service for a time. Maybe it rises to the level of disorderly conduct. For the Department of Justice, there's almost a sense of elation that they think they found the crime of the century. Harmeet Dillon, the head of the Civil Rights Division, issues statements that you would basically think the protesters were like the Inquisition. They were, so determined to suppress good, she even said, the Christian conduct and the like. They have that kind of hook that's been so important for them, including in the COVID days, this is a whole different thing. Instead of people standing up and making a point, now they can portray it as people wanting, as, bad, nasty, woke, dissenting Americans wanting to crush good American religious practice. It seems to me, we'll find out, but it seems completely a fictitious account, but man, oh man, are they loving that religious angle. So you're right. We'll see how it plays out. Obviously, the judges so far are not very impressed. And think about just the history, Ben, of protests in churches. You do go, this is your Colin Kaepernick point, you go to where the people are, right? And, they did nothing violent. I don't know, disorderly conduct, maybe. But the really sort of bare teeth effort to just portray these people as, essentially commie religious busters is, a complete kind of and characteristic DOJ overkill. So they could be, as you started out by saying, really going, 100 miles an hour into a crash and embarrassment. We'll see what happens with this case.
Another point to bring up also, you and I have been covering a lot vindictive prosecution, and we saw Abrego Garcia get that finding of vindictiveness. Obviously, the Comey and Letitia James case was heading in that direction and would have been found. Now, the White House account did an AI image of Nekima, and they altered the image that was already posted inappropriately by the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Noem censoring the face of the FBI agent or the Border Patrol, whoever was bringing Nekima into custody. His face was blurred, but they did an AI generated image of her to look like she was crying. They also darkened her skin so she looked blacker. Like, it was racist. It was a weird AI. It was manipulative, and it was viewed millions and millions and millions of times. Now, she also has a background as a civil rights lawyer. She knows her rights. And I think the first thing that she and her lawyers are going to now argue also is that there's a vindictiveness here as well. And they'll show that graphic in terms of the manipulation of her skin color and all of that. And, you know, that by itself could make a finding of vindictiveness. I mean, this is not a normal thing where the DOJ could you imagine, Harry, you were prosecuting it? Harry, you prosecuted some of the worst people in your office, drug traffickers, sex traffickers, extortion, horrible people, you know, who actually probably deserved to be publicly scorned and ridiculed. If you had anybody in your office post an AI, and I know it predates AI, but just go with this hypothetical.
Yeah.
If you had someone post an AI image of that criminal defendant, you know that criminal defense lawyer would be right in there showing the judge. You could lose. You would probably be saying
criminal defense lawyer. I would be right in there saying, "What do you possibly think you're doing?" And when you started with, "Can you imagine?" Can you imagine, whether by orders or not, who in the Department of Justice, took out the photo software and, let's make her blacker. Let's make, what kind of complete sickos do something like that? And, this is really, as you say, look, the Department of Justice, is supposed to prosecute cases. Department of Homeland Security does these other things. But the fact that Bondi and Todd Blanche, give me a break, have been all in here, look what it results in. Remember a quaint time when possibly Hillary Clinton lost the election because Jim Comey so inappropriately made a comment on evidence? They are bringing charges. They're bringing charges. They want to take away people's liberties. And their duties, ethical, moral, and legal, are so clear that you don't announce. You can recite the charges, the four corners of the indictment, but you don't dirty people up and pollute the jury pool and say all kinds of stuff. You do your talking in court. And this is a Department of Justice that does its talking everywhere but in court. Indeed, when they come to court, that's when they're in trouble. They don't have a leg to stand on. They change their arguments, and courts are starting to call them out. But this has just become routine. And I know, let's charge them. And then in addition, we will absolutely smear them in the press and call them every name in the book. That's just grotesque. And we've kind of come to accept it, or maybe many people have, as, that's just the MO of the Trump Department of Justice. It's foul.
Right, Harry, your AUSA, if they did that, you'd probably recommend them for disbarment, and you'd probably, or discipline.
I want them out of the office
immediately. Yeah. And you would be worried you may have just screwed up the entire case.
Exactly.
And it's not that's my point. It's not you would say you screw. And so when this case goes in that direction, which inevitably it probably will, then Trump and the DOJ will whine. And they'll go, oh, this was just some Biden appointed judge. And, and Harry, for me, when I speak to all of our viewers out there, I'm hoping, and I know that we're reaching out to people who are more than just Democrats or liberals. And I know we have a big independent audience and even a big Republican audience. But I hope to people who don't even like politics, who watch this because they want to get into the granularities of the law, that what they just understand is that even if you wanted to prosecute Nakima, like if your goal was you wanted it, you thought that was bad conduct, then you're screwing up your own prosecution by doing this. And it's bad behavior. When Harmeet Dillon is posting about Don Lemon and reposting the poly market betting odds about whether or not Don Lemon will get prosecuted or not, and they were at 39%. It's like, even if you wanted to prosecute Don, which I think is ridiculous and totally, and beyond frivolous and insane, you're screwing it up because you're doing these things, and then they whine. Oh, they're weaponized. No, you're just behaving like losers right now. You don't need to post on social media. You don't need to behave like this. Do your talking through your filings. You can do a press release when the complaint is filed. That's fine. You can do your first press conference using the words, the allegations, alleged. This is an allegation. This is an investigation. But you don't do more than that. You're the DOJ. If you want to be Dan Bongino, the podcaster, be the podcaster and go on and do that. Otherwise, you have an important role to serve, and just service, man, service.
Service, man. How about this little quaint idea? Presumption of innocence? Yeah, so 100%, and one gets the idea. For Trump himself, ordering up these ridiculous prosecutions of Powell, and now, by the way, Fry and Walz and all that stuff, you get the he just wants to screw with people, make them spend money, make them nervous, etc. The Department of Justice seems all in on that plan. They are not, try to keep these people in jail. They don't really think they have a chance at that, I believe, but it's all the sort of PR kind of value of it. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, has spent the last 2 days in Minnesota about this case because they are so hot and bothered and up in arms. I am here to tell you, whether at Main Justice, and thank you for, explaining the bilateral nature of my experience. I've seen it from both sides. Getting an attorney general to stop by for 45 minutes on the attorney general plane, so, it's easy enough to do, is a big honking deal. She's just been there for 2 days. This is the one that they want to make a cause célèbre of. And, it's at a minimum flying in the face of possible First Amendment activity. I haven't looked at it close. I can see at the end of the day thinking maybe there's some kind of minor violation here and that, is not fully mitigated by the expressive activity. And maybe there isn't. Again, the St. Paul police were thinking disorderly conduct. That's like throwing a cigarette on the street. But this effort by the DOJ is so politicized and in line with the kind of Trumpian, political agenda and the like. And it's just one more way in which the DOJ, my old DOJ, has just gone completely awry.
Well, good luck finding a federal jury in Minneapolis or St. Paul that's going to reach a conviction after you terrorize that community. It's why they didn't go and get an indictment, but they did this by way of criminal complaint.
100%. Yeah.
Everybody hit subscribe to our channel. More importantly, subscribe to Harry Litman's YouTube channel, Talking Feds Substack, Talking Feds Podcast, the Talking Feds YouTube channel. So when this video ends, you're on YouTube anyway. Just search Talking Feds and subscribe there right now. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.